So on today's political agenda, President-elect Trump is going to be meeting with President Biden in the Oval Office today. It's going to happen at about 11 a.m. Eastern time. Trump also expected to meet with House Speaker Mike Johnson. He'll also be meeting with the new Senate Majority Leader after Republicans vote this morning on the chamber's next leader. Joining us right now on the Majority Leader vote, Stef Kight covers the Senate for Axios. She's the co-author of the Axios Hill Leaders newsletter. CNBC Washington correspondent Emily Wilkins is with us as well. What is the actual state of play, folks? Steph?
I mean, we will see in, just a couple hours who Republicans decide to anoint as their next leader after, nearly 2 decades of leadership under Mitch McConnell. It's not clear which one's going to end up, taking the majority of the votes. We know that 27 votes is the magic number today. There could be multiple rounds of voting. Republicans will vote the first time around on all 3 candidates, John Thune, John Cornyn, and Rick Scott. And if none of them can get that 27 number of votes, then they will move to round 2 with the person receiving the lowest number of votes being eliminated. Thune has from the beginning kind of been viewed as a front runner, but vibes don't necessarily matter. All that matters is how senators actually cast a secret ballot vote. Cornyn is also a top contender. Most people see Rick Scott as the least likely of the 3 of them, but he's of course picked up a lot of support over the weekend from people in Trump world, and where his supporters might go on a second ballot will be something to watch.
Emily, that's what I was going to ask you about. From some of the reporting out there, there's all sorts of, machinations behind the scenes about Rick Scott, about whether there's too much pressure coming from the Trump camp on these senators, and what's can you speak to what the vibes or the feelings really are?
It's been really interesting. I mean, for something that's supposed to be a closed ballot, senators had protests outside their offices. They've been getting emails. They've had full inboxes when they come into work in the morning of people saying, hey, you need to back Rick Scott. But look, this is a private ballot, and the Senate is widely a chamber that is supposed to be immune from outside pressure, right? That's why these senators serve for 6 years. And to that point, the Senate has historically been somewhere that really does not have some of the pressure that Donald Trump has tried to put on it. You saw in the first term that the Senate really did act as a check and a balance on Trump. I think the big question that we have right now, can we expect the same from this Senate as we did from the Senate in 2017? And today is really the first big test of that. Rick Scott is clearly the one who is most aligned with Trump, the most in sync with Trump. Now, Trump, of course, has not come out. He has not endorsed yet in this race. There's still a very good chance that we could see Majority Leader Thune or Majority Leader Cornyn. But I think really that's going to be a big test and a big tell from the results we see today is how much senators feel like they have a mandate. And to that point, Trump has gone around talking a little bit about allowing these recess appointments. It would allow him to kind of bypass the Senate's authority to approve potential cabinet picks and other top-level administration officials. And some members, actually most members who I talked to last night said, look, we totally get that Trump wants to get people through the Senate quickly. We're 100% on board with that. But we have a responsibility to advise and consent. And you could tell these lawmakers, they do not want to give up that power that the Senate has.
Steph, what do you think about the sort of pressures that are being brought to bear? And is Thune a Trump guy, not a Trump guy, if that's how this all gets played out?
I mean, look, both Thune and Cornyn have had a very rocky relationship with the former president. I mean, there were times where, Trump was even threatening to try to mount a primary challenge against Thune just a few years ago. But of course, Thune and Cornyn also read the writing on the wall. They know that in today's day and age in the GOP, it's not acceptable for a Republican leader to not have a good relationship with the former president, now the president-elect. And so both have put in the time to kind of rebuild those relationships. And it's something that both of them, talk about a lot to the press and also with their members, trying to prove that they are someone who can work with the president and get things done on the Republican agenda. But there are still some who don't feel like it's enough. And that's going to be the big question. And you're seeing a lot of the closest Trump members, a lot of the senators who we know have the closest relationships to Trump come out publicly and back Rick Scott. So that is certainly a dynamic at play. But I would also, throw out there that while there is a growing number of voices in the Senate who are very ardently supportive of President Trump, there are also others who are much more old school and who are, will push back on the president-elect and who may not, be moved by those arguments.
Hey, Emily, just to your point that, senators have 6-year cycles, so they're a little more immune to some of these things. A third of them are up in 2 years in 2026. And if you look through it, it's 13 Democrats and 20 Republicans who are up. If you look through the list of Republicans who are up for re-election in 2 years, John Cornyn's on the list. You also have names like Shelley Moore Capito, Bill Cassidy, Susan Collins. Those may be some of the senators who in the past would have kind of been a little more independent-minded. You wonder if the pressure of going through this, knowing that you have to face re-election in 2 years, changes that dynamic.
I mean, it could. It is a secret ballot, though. So a lot of these individuals could, just not simply say who they voted for. And ideally, that would be respected. At the same point,
secret?
It's interesting that you brought that up.
Emily, does it stay secret in the past? Has it always been? Steph, do you guys know?
A lot of times they'll say who they voted for.
Yeah.
I mean, previously it has been a closed ballot. The last time they had,
but it could come out afterwards.
Could
come out, and you could get shamed. Even I would think, Steph.
Well, some can, say how they voted, and we would expect some already have announced how they plan to vote. But historically, it has remained a secret ballot. And this is, they go in, they write a name on a sheet of paper, and Senator Barrasso, who is currently the conference chair and is also running for whip, he will be reading and counting those votes himself. So, unless he can read handwriting and decides to try to share that, it is
writing with my left hand.
Yeah. Sounds exactly like Conclave, which is a big movie out with their vote.
One other question for you, Steph and Emily. We've been talking about some of these names that have to get confirmed. Department of Defense is probably the biggest, quote-unquote, outlier in terms of just the kind of traditional person that's been put into those roles. What is your sense about whether that is that's confirmable, if you will? Steph?
There was a lot of surprise last night. A lot of senators were telling me that they just need to figure out a little bit more about the nominee before they're able to actually make a decision on it or not.